works for an organization and follows just the ideas of the corporation, for example, tries to act on behalf of the corporation. Or we all try to help our friends, try to give advice to our friends if they are in trouble. So that's acting on behalf of others. Third, Meyer and Jefferson argue that we also show agency on behalf of entities that are not themselves understood as actors. What is this? For example, corporations take responsibility for the future, for society, or for animals, and so on. And then a last responsibility that actors take is to act on behalf of abstract but highly valued cultural principles. And these cultural principles are, for example, human rights, democracy, and so on, or freedom. So this is the core argument in the paper of Meyer and Jefferson. And this was the starting point for our studies. Okay, what did we first? We first conducted a pilot study. And in this pilot study, we analyzed the websites of three large corporations in Germany, Daimler, E.ON, Deutsche Bank, and we crawled their websites in 2011. We downloaded all the documents on their web pages and broke them into paragraphs. And we focused then on all paragraphs in which the term responsibility or responsibilities was mentioned. And we identified 16,915 paragraphs which contain the term responsibility or responsibilities. So what do corporations take responsibility for? And this is a lot of things they take responsibility for. They express their responsibility towards employees, towards the staff, towards the environment, towards the society, to customers, and so on. But what is interesting, or was interesting at least for us, they also express, of course, responsibility to shareholders, but not very often. Then we looked at other combinations, word-to-word relationships. Here, with regard to word for, they take responsibility for the environment, for society, for the regional development, and so on. And again, the economic responsibilities are not very often mentioned. It is mentioned here one time by the Deutsche Bank. We have responsibility for financial success. Other categories we analyzed are combinations of adverbs and the term responsibility. And we identified that they take societal responsibility, social responsibility, environmental responsibility, and again, economic responsibilities are not mentioned very often. So this was a qualitative study. We analyzed all this data by hand and took a lot of time to analyze all these paragraphs. But as always, or most of the times, if you do qualitative research, you have a problem. Reviewers say, well, it's qualitative stuff. You take the examples that you like, which fit into your theoretical framework, and it's only 3 corporations. Is this really possible to generalize your findings? So we conducted a second study. In this second study, we used computer linguistics to analyze the web pages of the largest publicly listed corporations in Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States. We took the corporations from the German stock index, DAX, the British Financial Times Stock Exchange, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And as you know, the British Financial Times Stock Exchange includes 100 corporations, so and the DAX only 30, and the Dow Jones again also only 30. We looked at the 30 most intensely traded and most highly valued corporations from the British Financial Times Stock Exchange. And for each corporation, all communication about its responsibilities from the corporation website was extracted, and for that we used a web crawler again, and we did this between April and June 2015. And we started from the front page of every corporation's website and searched for our node words, responsibility and responsibilities. And if the words were found, the documents were downloaded and decomposed in separate paragraphs. And then we automatically removed all identical paragraphs. And at the end, we identified nearly 85,000 paragraphs, which contained roughly 45 million words. And these 45 million words we used for our remaining analysis. And then we focused on the relevant word-to-word relationships, namely on specific word classes that are grammatically associated with responsibility and/or responsibilities in a comparable social and linguistic context. And these so-called grammar patterns are usually defined as linguistic expressions comprising grammatical relations, for example, the grammatically meaningful connection of responsibility to a verb or an object that reveal how words are regularly embedded in communication. And we again selected these grammar patterns that are relevant according to our theoretical considerations. As I've said in the beginning, organizations have the obligation, or corporations have the obligation, to assume responsibility for the self-interest, other actors, non-actors, and cultural principles. Okay, organizations can linguistically display these responsibilities by referring to verbs, what kinds of actions are associated with responsibility, adjectives, what kind of responsibility is assumed, and subjects and objects, who takes responsibility on behalf of whom and for what. Okay, and again, overall, the presentations of assumed responsibilities, as was in the quantitative study, it was very similar what the corporations express, what they exposed to the environment. However, we also identified differences. And these differences led us to formulate several hypotheses. And the first one was the variation between the cognitive orientation of an organization and the cognitive orientation displayed by other organizations in a supralocal field. And the supralocal field is here defined as Britain, Germany, and the United States, which represent a large part of the world economy and world society. Okay, these cognitive orientations, these expressions of responsibility will be smaller, the differences of the variation between the organizations will be smaller if the organization has adopted a larger number of formal templates that refer to corporate responsibilities, such as the ISO 40000 or United Global Compact. If these organizations have adopted these standards, they talk much more and in a more similar way about their responsibilities compared to organizations which have not adopted these templates. It was confirmed. The second hypothesis is the variation between organizations' cognitive orientation and the cognitive orientations displayed by other organizations in the supralocal field in world society corresponds with the local origin of the organization. That means British organizations are, if you consider them as a group, more similar to each other than the German group or the United States group. Okay, again, this hypothesis was confirmed. Third hypothesis, the variation between an organization's cognitive orientation and the cognitive orientations displayed by other organizations in their local field is smaller for organizations that originate from a field affiliated with the implicit variant of responsibility. Martin and Moon distinguished between explicit and implicit social responsibility, and Germany, especially Germany, but also Britain, are more linked to the implicit variant of a corporate responsibility. And our argument here was that these organizations are much more similar in their expression. There's not so much variation in this group compared to the US organizations, which use these concepts, this is our argument, just to market their identities. Okay, again, this hypothesis is confirmed. Well, so far we have only looked at the organizations which reflect the responsibilities that are expected from them, as we argue, by society or the cultural framework of the corporations. Okay, and in the third study, we look at the societal perceptions and expectations of corporate responsibility. And here we focused on newspaper articles, and we did so from 1950 to 2012. And then in Germany, we picked the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and the Süddeutsche Zeitung, in Britain, the Times, Guardian, the Independent, in the United States, the New York Times and the Washington Post, and again, focused on corporate responsibility. Our argument here is that in these new newspapers, the public discourse on the responsibilities of corporations is reflected or should be reflected. And we identified more than 50,000 articles, which we again analyzed based on methods from the computer linguistics. Okay, what are our findings? Well, overall and over time, the similarity in the meaning of corporate responsibility in Germany, Great Britain or UK and the United States increased and significantly increased. While in the 50s, in the 1950s, the degree of similarity was around 40 to 50% in these word-to-word relations or combinations. In the end of our observation period, that is in 2012, there's an enormous similarity in the way corporate responsibility is perceived in the public discourse, which we argue is reflected in newspaper articles. It was about 80 to 90%. And we also built some network graphs to show this, how this developed over time. So it's hard to see, I guess, but you can believe me, it's on the slide here. In the beginning, you see that Germany and the United States and the UK in the 50s to the end of the 60s were very far apart from each other. And in the end of our observation period, they were very close and they all used the same expressions with regard to corporate responsibility. So the core arguments of Meyer and Jefferson in their article seem to be or are confirmed. Now we have these responsibilities which are expected in the environment, in the cultural environment of corporations. The corporations, as we have shown in the first two studies, reflect these perceptions and expectations. Yes, and over time, it has, at least in large parts of the Western societies, become more similar what is conceived as the corporate responsibilities. Thank you very much.